Welcome back, everyone, to this next episode of the Industrial Innovators Podcast. Today, we're going to shake things up a little bit. We're going to be talking about entrepreneurism and specifically the entrepreneurial operating system that we operate under in our business and why. And so to shake that up, today I'm going to be interviewed, and my co-host, the fabulous Mr. Michael Brown, is going to be running the show. And so let's get on with the show. Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm at your disposal.
Right on. Thanks, Don. Yeah, so I think that what I wanted to start with was just asking some quick questions as the early stages of Innovator as to why you kind of chose it as the model, and then get into a little bit of like the struggles initially getting the wheels moving with EOS as the operating system, and then where you see it going in the future. And we'll kind of just go through a couple of those questions that I had outlined. So I think the first one that I wanted to bring up was, what prompted you to explore EOS as a business model when you started Innovator?
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further. It kind of leads to how we found this operating system. I spent 17-ish years, about half of my working life, working for other specialty services companies. Some of them were private, some of them were really corporate, all of them were bureaucratic. It seemed like when you worked in a branch office or a region, you lived on an island and you didn't know what the instructions were that were going to come from head office. There was always sort of things went into a vacuum. You were developing, they weren't sharing their real business plans with you. And so you developed plans for your own region, and they were never connected. There was never people on the same page. And I was fortunate enough to be working with groups of people who were or became the top performing areas of the businesses I was working in. And we just didn't feel like we were getting the support from those, that head office sort of function. And it just felt dysfunctional. So when, fast forward to, the 2007, 2009 period, when I first started Innovator as a consulting business, and then by 2009 turned it into a full operating business. I started on the principle that, I didn't want to be, there was a lot of things I wanted to do differently. And it was really specialty services had evolved from when I started to that point. And, it was always a niche, specialized business, but certain parts of it were starting to be viewed or treated, as a commodity. And I'm like, well, you can't be in the specialty business and act like a commodity, because there are people investments and training investments and technology investments that are different than if you're just sending people out into the field. And so I truly, we named Innovator because we wanted to be focused on innovation. So, the company itself was about innovation. And if you're going to create value, you're going to create some scale, you got to figure out how you want to do things. And, I think anyone who starts a business, anyone who, and I felt like I was entrepreneurial even when I was running branch and regional offices for other companies. So there's an attitude of you want autonomy and you want to have purpose. And when I first started the company, and I think many people who are starting, an industrial business probably experience this. When you first start, you're kind of the chief cook and bottle washer. You're involved in every part of the company, and once you start, you're initially starting to try to build some momentum. You're trying to get the wheels turning, and you're involved in sales and operations and finance and marketing and presentations and technical and safety, because you got to get all these pieces together. And eventually it gets tiring that you're doing everything, or you're having to keep your thumb on everything. And you fast forward a handful of years, into the company, and you're building momentum, but it still feels like you're on stage spinning 12 plates. And if you've ever watched a circus performer or a stage performer, in some variety show spinning 12 plates, he gets 2 or 3 going. And by the time he gets 8, 9, or 10 going, the first 3 that he worked on were wobbling, and you're running back to do that. And I was like, and that's what a business is like, after you get the wheels, the wheels turning, all the plates spinning, there's always some new plate that, you need to go back and pay a whole bunch of attention to. And so I was reading a book called that really intrigued me, and it was called The Self-Managed Company. And it was really teaching the entrepreneur how to think differently around what they should be doing and what the team should be doing. And so I joined an entrepreneurial group and started to really think about entrepreneurial ways of operating. I mean, I'd read lots of stuff, but being in a particular system of how the entrepreneur should think and act, and how they can simplify their world and not be the chief cook and bottle washer of everything. The one thing that really stood out to me that was true for me, I think it's true for every entrepreneur, even if they don't really see it or feel it, and I think it's also true for your team, is that we all have some, a handful of really great things that we do really, really well. And as your business gets bigger and, and starts building momentum, you and your best people get to do less and less of what you're really good at, because you're spinning more and more plates. And so, it really taught me to think about, like, how do I focus my time and energy in, my zone of greatness, or my zone of usefulness. And I found out that, I was doing about, when I inventoried everything that I was spending my time on, I had about 56 things on my list. And there was about 10 things that I was really great at, what are known as unique abilities, that are the things that if I did those more, I could have a huge impact on the results that I could help the whole team work on. And those are called unique abilities. And so I started to focus on that, and then started to hire some people who could get some of those things off my plate. And I tried to hire people who were better at things in the business than I was, so that I could feel like I could let go of the vine.
And at this point, EOS was not implemented, correct?
Yeah, no, EOS. So this was the entrepreneur side of that. So it was learning as an entrepreneur a whole set of tools to how an entrepreneur should think and act. And so I was dialing that in for a couple of years. And what I realized was, the entrepreneur should be working on the business. And that's what I was working on, is how do I have the greatest impact in working on my business, as opposed to really in the weeds, spinning every plate in the business. And so that was really how I started to think about, how do I structure the company differently with the right people in the right seats. And then we got introduced to this idea that if the entrepreneur has a system, you need to have a system that sort of complements that for your team, so that you're all working in this sort of succinct way of how an entrepreneurial company should operate. And so we had an entrepreneur system, and I got introduced to this book called Traction, which was, an operating system for an entrepreneur's team. And what I loved about it, and this is the deceptive thing about Traction and EOS, is when you read it, everything in it makes sense. It's very simple. And I think that's why some people discount it, because, there's an old adage that, when people read something and they say it's common sense, and they kind of already know those ideas, that's not uncommon for people to read something, go, that all makes sense. And all that, I know all that stuff. That's great. Are you doing it? Are you actually doing these things to actually drive some simple systems in your business, some simple structure in your business that everyone in your company is doing, so that you're all speaking the same language, that you're all operating within a way that you can create some scalability and some predictability? And the answer to that is no. Um, I've got lots of entrepreneurial friends. Lots of them that operate within this sort of structure, but I know lots of small and medium-sized entrepreneurs in the industrial space who are still the chief cook and bottle washer. They're still spinning plates. Got guys who are great at engineering, and they're spending all their time on legal and finance and HR issues because someone's got to do it. And and the mindset needs to shift, because the entrepreneur's value shouldn't be doing onboarding for new hire employees. But I know lots of people who do all of these things. And so, I was on this journey of how to, thinking like an entrepreneur and wanting to create something different. And I got introduced to Traction, and Traction really is this system for everyone on the entrepreneurial team to use to help the entrepreneur do what they're trying to accomplish in their company. And it's 6 elements, and those 6 elements have 2 components each. And so when you figure out how to do these 6 things and these 2 components of each of these things, you get a healthy company that's predictable, that's easy to operate, and now you've got something that you can start to scale and grow. And so, yeah, I mean, it was this journey for many, many years of starting off with experiencing bureaucracy, knowing that didn't seem to work well at the ground level, when, particularly for high performing people. And then starting off with wanting to do things differently, but not really having the platform and the structure to know how to do it. I knew lots of elements of what I wanted to do, and then finding an entrepreneurial system, and then that leading to an entrepreneurial operating system. And so that's been the journey for innovators 16 years, is going through that.
So you found it, you found the system through 2 books. Is there a peer or a mentor that kind of made it hit home for you? Like really brought it to light? Or what did you find that through the books?
Yeah, so I'm in an entrepreneurial system called Strategic Coach. And what's great about Strategic Coach is it's a peer group of other entrepreneurs. And so we get to talk and share about our journeys, our struggles, what's working, what's not working, sharing ideas. And what's really interesting is that, doesn't matter. I know entrepreneurs in all sorts of businesses, and if you're in welding, or you're a millwright company, or you're in specialized industrial services like us, we might think that the challenges in our company are different than that of a dentistry office, or an accounting firm, or a trucking company. But you know what? Outside of what that company does, all the issues are the same. They're people issues, they're process issues, they're how do you measure success, how do you predict it. It's getting traction for your people to do what they need to do. It's exactly the same issues and exactly the same problems and success stories across it all. And so Strategic Coach introduced us to the operating system, and it's what works really well is Strategic Coach is the entrepreneurial system. And there was a gentleman who was in Strategic Coach as a peer in one of the groups for 15, 20 years, and he was struggling to turn his business around. He inherited it from his father and wanted to change it so it could scale. And he took ideas from the entrepreneur system and sort of modified them for how do I operationalize this inside of the company for my entrepreneurial team. And that was a gentleman by the name of Gino Wickman. And Gino first built the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, for his company, and was able to successfully make that company turn and become quite successful. And then because he did that, he decided to write about it, and then some people started to catch on to it, and he turned it into a program kind of similar to Strategic Coach, that is focused on supporting the entrepreneurial team and training and coaching and providing mentorship there. So there's and so how we decided to operationalize EOS inside of our businesses was with an EOS implementer, someone who was an outside expert who came in and walked us through how to set up, how to structure the business that way, and we meet with him once every 90 days to sort of dial things in and to plan the next 90 days in the business. And so that's a gentleman, our implementer we've been working with for what 6 or 7 years now, is a gentleman by the name of Ted Bradshaw. And Ted not only is an implementer but of EOS, but he is also a trainer and sort of guide for all of the other EOS implementers that are around the world. And I think there's several hundred of them now, that are outside people who can come in and help an entrepreneurial business like ours set up and structure their business around EOS. So it takes a team to make this kind of stuff work.
So early on, you decide EOS is going to be the model. You bring it back. At this point, what size is the company, and what was your steps to start the implementation?
I think I joined Coach in 2016 or 2017, got introduced to the idea of EOS in late 18, maybe early 19. And I think we started the journey of the onboarding process and the work that you got to do to kind of change systems and structures in your company in late 2019. And the interesting thing about that is, in the early days of our business, from 2009 to about 2016 or 17, we had a different business environment in Canada. We had a different political environment in Canada, and growth in the business in terms of just revenue growth was on a steady upward trajectory, because there was a lot of energy projects, there was a lot of capital projects, and by 2017 we'd had a couple of years of a different type of federal government that was not a big supporter of energy, and we've had that same government ever since, and so it changed the entire. Maybe that'll change this week, but I don't know. By 2019, you're starting to really feel the effects that there's a pretty big segment of our industry that has, been throttled way back, and that was new projects, new capital construction. And so we saw sort of this growth right up until 17, and then when capital construction stopped, we were back to our maintenance focused business. And so the business had shrunk probably 50%, and because a big chunk of the market was no longer there, and realistically it hasn't returned, and so you had to pivot your focus to focusing on where the business opportunities were, and in the industrial space, that is industrial maintenance and industrial maintenance turnarounds. And some level of small capital work, but no major capital. And so we'd shrunk. The whole industry had shrunk, and we decided there was no way that we were going to continue to grow by me having my fingers in everything. It wasn't the best use of my time. There are better people in finance, better people in operations than me. Um, I'm a visionary kind of thinker who looks at where I want the business to go. But the day to day is people who focus on the details of what we got to do this week. Are it's better for other people to do. And so that's where we started. Was the business had shrunk 50%, but we still had a big vision for growth, and we needed to simplify things to those core elements of EOS and get the right people in the right seats, and then create predictability by creating simplified systems and processes for people to follow, create simple measurement that we could tell if the people were doing the right things to create the results we were looking for, and create a cadence. I remember with all that busyness when you were spinning 12 plates, that I remember a couple of comments from people going, we don't meet anymore, and and we were so busy being busy that we had lost the discipline of having a meeting cadence in our teams. And the way you found out that there were problems in the business is when something hit a brick wall and you had to fix it, as opposed to being proactive to identify these things and work on. I mean, a friend of mine, Joe Polish, he leads another entrepreneurial group, and he says all businesses exist to solve problems, right? If industrial facilities didn't need maintenance and didn't need specialty services, that's their problem, is they need maintenance. That's a good opportunity for companies, right? To be able to provide those things. And so, but all businesses exist to solve client problems. But the other thing that is true is all employees inside of a company are there to identify and solve problems so that the business can operate and go and do the revenue. And so if you don't have a system for everyone in your company identifying, discussing, and solving problems, what you have is a disengaged team who simply start saying, well, that's just the way it is. And how many companies are out there that just have issues that are just part of who they are, because no one will ever talk about it, try to solve it, or the people who care about it have tried 10 times and and can never get anyone in management and leadership to pay attention. So they stop talking. I mean, I think the most dangerous thing that can happen in a company is when your people stop raising issues. And so you've got to create a system to encourage that kind of stuff. I mean, we've got one competitor, and I remember this, but it stands out to me. I remember experiencing this, and you probably might have as well, Mike. But when I worked in bureaucratic companies, and I fortunately, because of the teams I was on, and that we were in Western Canada, and there was a lot of buoyancy in the energy market, we were always top performing regions in the companies we worked with across North America. And a really silly thing that would happen is you're trying to grow your business, doing your job, and you put in something like a capital expenditure request, an AFE. They ask you to write a business plan to tell you how you're going to grow your revenue, how you're going to do it, the people you need, the training you need, the equipment you need, and you submit this plan to head office. And it goes into a vacuum cleaner. And you never hear about it anymore. It's a plan that you say, here's what you're going to do. But, business plans need resources. They need decisions made on what we're going to invest in and what we're not going to invest in. And for me, I would send plans in going, we're going to accomplish this much in these business areas, but we're going to need these levels of capital investment and these training courses to build up our workforce. And you'd never hear back. You'd never get an approval. You'd never get a rejection. You go, nice plan. If you talk to, if, 3 months later, when you found some manager at head office, he said, yeah, well, great plan. I'm like, yeah, but, the plan can't be executed if you don't approve it and you don't approve the expenditures we need to support it. I remember um, I was talking to someone who joined our team a couple of years ago from a competitor, and this, we we kind of pivoted in our business from the old traditional manual measure ups of EPEs to 3D scanners and scaling up how many 3D scanners we had and all the value that that's created from a speed, efficiency, innovation standpoint. And someone joined our team a couple of years ago and said, the company I was with, we put in a request to buy one of those for the last 5 years. And not only did we not get an approval, we never got an approval or a rejection. It just disappeared. And, and I think that's what happens in a ton of companies is there's, there's no system for keeping leadership, management, team, and different offices all on the same page, all operating to here's what we're going to get done this quarter, this year. There's just a lot of people who are working hard and some people who are not, and some people who are not paying attention to how are they supposed to support their teams to accomplish those things. So that's a long-winded answer, but my journey, our journey to get to EOS comes from a place of experiencing the other side of that, where you don't have a company on the same page. It's built on bureaucracy and hierarchy as opposed to merit and performance.
So to understand that initially, when you did when you decided, okay, we're going to do this in 2019, and you came back and you introduced it to the company, it was yourself first pushing it down. Did you use anyone within the company? Like, did it start by rolling it out to leadership, or how did you introduce EOS to your company?
Yeah, so I had a group of managers. I wouldn't say we had an EOS leadership team structure, but we had a team of managers who were the senior people. I gave them the book and asked them to read it, and then I brought in Ted, our implementer, and we went through their process of onboarding and introducing the leadership team. And I don't remember what they call it, but there's something called a vision day and a structure day where they sort of get together with the team that is now the starting position of what is called the EOS leadership team, and you really flesh out your core values, where you want to take the business, the long-term vision, and the mid-term vision. So you kind of look out 10 years and where do you see your business? You look out 3 years and seeing what you're trying to accomplish. You spend some time talking about what are the core values of the company and what's the overall culture that you're trying to create in the business. And those core values and that culture is part of how you build the right team moving forward. So we did that. We went through a couple of day offsite workshop, really focused on long-term, mid-term culture vision. And that creates the foundation for, if you're clear on where you want to go and you're clear on who you want to be and what you want to accomplish, then you can start to build on, okay, what are the things, what do we gotta create? What do we gotta fix? What do we gotta put in place to support that, quarter by quarter, year by year, moving forward in progress towards that longer term vision. And so that's where we started.
Right on. So, how do you know it works? How do you measure it? How are you measuring it day in, day out? Like what makes it tick? How do you know?
Well, there's a cadence, right? There's a few different things. So first off, inside of EOS, there's measurement, right? And some people will be familiar with this, some people won't. And I think the clearer people get on, here's my role, here's what I'm supposed to be doing and accomplishing in the business. When people get clear on that, And every single person in the business should have that. I call it the count-on-ability chart. EOS calls it accountability. I like to say I can count on this person to do these things. Once that's clear, and that takes work, you start off with the leadership team, and then you move it down a level. As you put teams together, and you understand where you're going, you understand where you are today, and you set up a set of measurements, weekly measurements and quarterly measurements and annual measurements. I was meeting with a friend of mine in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him, how does he measure success? He says, well, we've got a list of 20 things we want to get done this year. Like, so what, do you wait till the end of the year to figure out, how you did? And so, a lot of companies do that. They have 20 goals, 7 get done, and they go, oh, that's pretty good. Inside of EOS, you develop a 1-year plan. And that 1-year plan has some specific measurements, of what you're trying to accomplish. And some of those are goals, which are sort of big objectives that you want to have in place in the business. Could be training programs, could be new clients, could be having better processes in place, or fixing some things in this team. Whatever some of the key elements, some of the pieces in the puzzle that you're trying to accomplish to keep moving forward. Your 1-year plan defines that, and it includes, revenue and profit and safety and a set of results. So think about your 1-year plan with, between measurements and goals, there's about 8 or 10 results you're trying to accomplish. Now, for my friend in Los Angeles, he had these 20 results, right? So we have, inside of our 1-year plan, we've got about 10 of those. So how do you make that happen every day? Because you mentioned every day, day in, day out. For a lot of your employees, 10 goals for the year they don't have clarity on what it is I can be doing today, this week, this month, that is making a contribution towards those 10 things. And that's why lots of companies don't get stuff done in a 1-year plan. And so how EOS helps us do that is we look at our 1-year plan with those 10 objectives. They call them goals. And we break that down into what are we going to do this quarter, this next 90 days. And you look at what's got to get done. And there's always a big laundry list of issues that are preventing you from accomplishing those goals. And you start picking the quarterly goals, which inside of EOS are called rocks. And so we got these rocks for the quarter. All of a sudden, you've got a handful of things you want to get done this next 90 days. And then how do you break that down one level more? Each team in the company has a set of measurements every week that they report on. So they report on how they're progressing on that rock, but they also have daily performance things. So many of our listeners may have read or heard of things like Measure What Matters by John Doerr, a great book that he wrote about how Silicon Valley really drove success. There's another great book called The Most Important Number by a friend of mine, Lee Benson, where he really spells out, what are the 2 or 3 things every person in the company needs to be measured on to know that they're being successful. And I read a great book before I even got introduced to those, called it's the 4 Disciplines of Execution by Sean Covey, and they really talked about this idea of leading and lagging indicators, and that's really what is the most important thing day in and day out in the business inside of EOS. Is if you're a salesperson, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 things you're going to be measured on every week that are about actions and behaviors and some result that those actions and behaviors create? And so obviously a salesperson needs to create revenue. Well, what creates revenue? Certain levels of meeting with customers, certain levels of effectiveness in managing opportunities, certain levels of keeping their sales pipeline healthy. Those things, when you get people doing those things successfully and measuring them, it's predictable that you can create a result. And so the simplicity of what I like in the system, and the more we dial this in, it makes the business predictable and knowing that it's working, is if everyone in the company is on a team. It could be an operations team, an admin finance team, a sales team, a marketing team, and every one of those people, every single one of them, has at least one 90-day objective that they're working on and they're being accountable to do. And every single one of them have 2, 3, or 4 measurements that they report on every week that says, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And
and not gauged by hours worked.
So a great point. Look, I mean, this is a problem, right, that our world is in. And and some of it is by design, right? I mean, many employees, including lots of hours, get paid by the hour, and they measure their contribution by, I worked 60 hours this week, I really worked hard. But they can never say, what did you accomplish? And so in the entrepreneurial world, our attitude is work smart. I mean, I think work ethic and working hard is a virtue, but it shouldn't be how you measure success, right? It should be. I mean, I hold a lot more respect and
to clarify, that's probably you mean that by the people that are helping to run the business. Field workers, on the other hand, 60 hours in the field is 60 hours in the field.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you've got a part of your team where your revenue comes from billable hours is great, right? Billable hours is great, right? And so inside of that team, billable hours is great, non-billable hours, not so great. Unless you create a system for what am I getting done? Non-billable hours is a cost, right? And so in the entrepreneurial world, the mindset is if I'm going to have a cost, I want to think about it like an investment. And so if I'm going to have a field person that gets 10 non-billable hours, that needs to be viewed as an investment. And that investment should create a result. And so how do we think about non-billable hours for our field people? How much training did we get done? How much job prep did we get done? How much equipment maintenance did we get done? That's what non-billable hours for that team is. And so if you're measuring that, you should have a measurement of what are they doing and getting done with those non-billable hours, because it needs to be an investment, right? On the business side, I don't want our business employees to be working 60, 70 hours a week, working really hard. I really value hearing stories about, it used to take me 15 hours to process payroll, and I figured out how to automate that, so now I can do it in one. That is, if you take those two examples, I'm doing payroll in 1 hour because I'm working smarter. I'm doing payroll in 15 hours because I'm working hard. I value this person 1,000 times more because this creates predictability and scalability. It's not that I don't, entrepreneurs don't respect hardworking people. We do, but we want them to work smart while they're doing it so they can become more productive. I mean, the definition of an entrepreneur, and I didn't write it. It was written by an economist by the name of John Baptiste Say in about 1805. It's the modern definition of entrepreneurism. And an entrepreneur takes things of a lower value and a lower yield to a higher value and a higher yield. And so higher levels of productivity. Entrepreneurism by definition is higher productivity and growing results. And so inside of an entrepreneurial company, what you have to value is people who get things done with higher levels of productivity, not higher levels of effort. because, like, horsepower has limitations, but, you think about it from the point of view of, a 5 horsepower car gives you 5 horsepower. That's a really old car. It's like a Model T, right? But the minute that they put a transmission in it, the transmission gave it leverage. And now all of a sudden you can get more speed, more torque, more power out of that engine. And that's kind of the way people need to think about working hard and working smart. Working hard is the engine. It has a fixed amount of energy. But productivity is about putting a transmission in that to make it go faster without extra effort. And in some cases, less effort, right? We all drive pickup trucks in our industry, and how long would our engines run if we were always running them at 6,000 RPM?
Yeah.
And that's how entrepreneurial employees need to think is I can't run my engine in the red line all the time because my engine's going to blow up. And we see that for people who struggle with that, that's what we see happening. And our core value, our number one core value, is family first. Not only from an entrepreneurism point of view do I want people to work smart, I want them to have a good life. I want them to go home to their families. I want them to have a quality of life. I don't want people to be working 24 days in a row and then getting 3 days to see their family, and doing that all the time, because it's predictable that 3 months, 6 months down the line, they're going to have health issues, or they're going to have relationship issues, or they're going to have other issues that are going to lead to hurting themselves and us potentially losing a great person because they were redlining for too long. And so,
Yep.
that's the key to working smart. Be a transmission,
So,
not an engine.
yeah, how do you see how would you grade your current leadership team implementing EOS today?
Great question. When we started EOS, our implementer said a pretty standard thing is that as you go through EOS in your first year or two, you're going to probably see a 50% change in your leadership team, and eventually even in on other teams as you kind of flesh things out. And that's kind of exactly what happened between 2019 and 2021. We had to shift some people out that just didn't fit into the core values, didn't fit into the operating system, didn't fit into the simple transparency that it creates. And the last 3 years, we've been dialing that in. And where we're at right now is, I think we're about 80% now. I think we were running at 40 or 50% while we were figuring it out, and I think that's the journey. 80, maybe even 90% at the leadership team, and I think we're getting to the point with not just with the leadership team, but on their teams. I think we're getting to a solid 70 to 80% there too. And so,
So what is the challenge? What's the challenge? Why is it not 100%? What do you think that challenge is?
uh, I think it's a couple of things. One is, um, and EOS talks about this, and other books do. Um, you need to, there needs to be a persistence and a bit of grit on the part of the leader, the entrepreneur, and then the leadership team to drive this and say something. In EOS, they say sometimes you got to say something 7 times before someone hears it the first time. And a lot of people say it once or twice, and then they think it's once and done. And any operating system, any process, any new policy and procedure anywhere in the world, when you announce it once, that's not enough. You got to put it into practice, and you got to say it over and over again. And I can guarantee you, we had our state of the company meeting cadence earlier this week, as you know, and I'm certain there are things that we talked about in that meeting that we've talked about every quarter, that there were people in the room who, for whatever reason, they heard it for the first time because it resonated with them in their current role and their current focus. And so it takes time. I think the other thing is um, leaders need to be readers. And, I read all this stuff and I dive when I find a concept that I see in 3 or 4 places. And, the ideas around EOS are not mind-bogglingly new. As I said, there's an element of EOS called measurement. It's one of the 6 elements, and yet, Covey wrote about it, John Dewar wrote about it, Lee Benson wrote about it. There's lots of books on how to effectively create measurement systems. But if no one, I've read all those things, but it's not reasonable for the entrepreneur to think that everyone is learning, reading, and enthusiastic about learning about how to build their business as much as they are, right? But you do need to set a condition that says, guys, it's not good enough for you to just hear me say it. I need you to invest some energy into reading it for yourself. And, I think the journey for me has been, where we started to see more and more traction in the leadership team and in other levels in the business is going beyond, here's a book, read it, to, did you read it? Let's talk about it. And there's something that seems to shift there when you get the buy-in of people putting in the effort to learn and grow themselves. And I don't know what that answer is. I've always been a reader, but lots of people aren't, right? I think in the Western world, when people leave school, it's for a large portion of the population, it's the last time they read a book where they're going to learn something, and and so creating a culture of learners, I think, is really key. So, but
I've read books.
if I knew exactly what the formula was of how we made the spark, I think I'd write a book about it and I'd publish it and I'd turn it into a course. All I know is it took a lot of grit, a lot of perseverance, lots of frustration. But we're at the point where, because I think when you find 2 or 3 people who get as enthusiastic about it as you, the entrepreneur, it starts to create a network effect that there's an expectation. Guys, you got to learn.
Yeah, from my point of view, like, I've read the books and they were great, but when I really started to see the value in the system was when I started to use the tools.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
the tools are great, right? Like, you can use the experience transformers, strategy circles, 4x4s, like, the list goes on of the tools that you can use. Can you explain a couple of your key ones that you've used in the company and how it's benefited you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I'll touch on this, right? So along this journey, I've studied behavior and habits, and so I'll give a plug to a really close friend of mine, Dr. B.J. Fogg from Stanford. He wrote a book called Tiny Habits, and I went on with several members of our team to get certified in that sort of habit design, behavior design program he has. One of the things that I think is really important about knowledge, and I think it touches on your point, is knowledge does not create action. Habits and behaviors do. And inside of behavior design, there's the ability to take information and put it into action. And so he's got a formula, but what he says is you got to provide training, you got to give people a tool, and you got to make it easy to do. And when the more of those elements that you can put together, then you get people to do what they learned. And so you can read the book and know it and go, well, that makes sense. But how do you make it easy for them to do it? You give them a tool, and the tool is, it is a piece of paper. It's a form that says, when you're thinking about how to sell differently, or how to have a lessons learned conversation with a client, this is the structure that you go through. It's simple, it's easy to follow, and it creates a result. And so the tools, I think, are really important when you give people the tool, and even the tool itself. Like, I remember a member of our leadership team coming to me, and we had all these tools and they made sense to him, but he still needed context of like, where would I use this? And to me, that was intuitive, right? Like if you're using a tool like an impact filter, which is a thinking tool to plan an outcome of a project of any sort, anywhere where you're thinking about, a step-by-step way of getting something done. And but what I did for him was I go, here's like 10 examples of inside of our business of where you could use an impact filter, where you could use a strategy plan, a strategy circle, where you could use an experience transformer. And that seemed to start to resonate. And then we've gone even further recently, and we've created AI tools that people can literally just talk to AI, and the AI will walk them through how to plan something out using an impact filter. So some of the tools that I think have worked really, really well, that we use a lot, and some that we use a little more sparingly that are useful. I think a tool that we use all the time in the business and we need to consistently leverage is something just called a communication builder. It's really just a page that you complete that says, here's how I communicate. Here's the best way to communicate with me. Here's the worst ways to communicate with me. And, in some of the books I've written, I've said, because, once you use that, it really helps you dial in and share with people how you operate. And so for me, I don't take unscheduled phone calls, because I've learned that I have a calendar, and if I'm going to get stuff done, I have focus time and blocks in my calendar. And so the best way to communicate with me is not an unsolicited phone call. It's to text me and ask me if I'm free, or schedule time with me. And so texting and or LinkedIn messages are the least polluted areas of communication. I mean, if someone sends me an email and asks me to meet, I mean, I get 1,000 emails a day. And so it won't even resonate, or I won't see it, right? And so I think the communication builder is a cool tool. The impact filter is a really great tool. And these are some coach tools that we've operationalized. But the impact filter is just a one-page tool, when you're planning a rock, when you're planning a simple project, when you're planning, when you're trying to get something out of your head as a leader or a manager or supervisor, and you're trying to give it to someone, say, hey, go do this, and giving them clarity. I had a meeting for one of our new divisions with our marketing team yesterday, and they just wanted clarity on what we wanted on the website. And they asked me for a meeting, and I literally just sat there and rather than just sort of talking, I took out this tool and I wrote down, here's what success looks like for this website. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Bang. And I was able to share that with them, and everyone was on the same page really, really quickly. So the impact filter is a great tool. I think in the bureaucratic world and inside of a lot of teams, there's people in companies who are resistant to change. They are resistant to taking risks. They are afraid of failure, right? And so what happens with those kinds of people, and I think it's human nature to be, protect yourself, is if you give them a new challenging project, and, we're a company called Innovator. Our whole business is to do things differently. And so people who are resistant to change are really going to have a struggle, right? Because we're constantly trying to move the needle. And so what do those kinds of people always do? You say, hey, we want to do this new thing with inventory. And, we want to digitize it, and we want to make it simple and fast. And people who are afraid of failure, people who are resistant to change, people who are resistant to risk-taking, and we actually can measure that. And so that's another tool I'll talk about in a minute. Those people will tell you 8 reasons why they can't, right? They'll go, we can't do it because of this, we can't do it because of this, we can't do it because of this, we can't do it because of this. And so
take the feed in,
yeah. And so rather than beating them up on that, there's a tool called the strategy circle that is perfect for that kind of a mindset, because it starts off with, here's the goal. we want to create this completely new inventory system. And the next step is, tell me all the obstacles we face to doing that. And so for those people who are those laggards or resistant to change, fear of failure people, they now have a role to identify every reason why we can't. They're called obstacles. And they list them all off. You go, is there anything else that'll stop us? Is there anything else? And all of a sudden they list their 8 things. Go, great. There's the path to success. What do you mean? Well, we don't have all of our torque wrenches serialized. What's the solution for that? What's the strategy? Mm-hmm. We're going to assign someone for 10 hours to identify and figure out how to serialize those tools. And the path to getting stuff done is not using obstacles as an excuse not to move. The obstacles are actually the source of the fuel to actually get the thing done. And so using a strategy circle kind of leverages that tendency of people to, devise action as opposed to procrastination. How do you identify people who are like that? Or in anyone? And so we have an EOS tool that, it's part of the toolbox. It's called Colby. And it is a tool that helps you measure people's instincts for how they take action. And so we can see on a team who are the people who are resistant to developing a system, using a system, following a system. Who are the people who are going to be the change agents, the ones who accept change, the ones who resist change. Who are the people who are great at restoring and doing maintenance on equipment? Who are the people who can see in their mind's eye what it should look like? And who are the people who are going to be really high quality people who are going to be like sculptors and really, if it's a piece of equipment or something that needs to be perfect, there's people for that. Same thing with information. Who are the people who are going to do research for you? Who are the people who are going to use what's available? And who are the people who can take 10 pages of what the customer said and break it down into, here's the 5 things we need to focus on. And so those are really important skills in a business, right? But not everyone has the same things. And if you assign someone who is low on following systems and processes, and I think you are, right? And you say to you, I'm a low accommodator, right? So I'm a 4 in that structure. And so my best way of dealing with systems and structure is to use templates and to use existing things and make modifications. I'm great at reviewing a contract and marking it up and say, or a process and saying, here's 3 things to fix, but you give me a blank piece of paper and it'll stay blank. But if you assign me to build a system, it won't happen. Now, that's different from me wanting the system as an entrepreneur. There's a difference between wanting it and doing it. And so Colby's a great tool for helping you figure that out. So those are a few of the tools. And I think with our customers, a tool that helps us, for any of our listeners who are in the industrial space, if you've ever done a project and you've had a lessons learned meeting and they did a big report on here's everything that we learned from this project, they all know the answer to this question. How many times did the lessons from that project get implemented so that you didn't repeat mistakes from the past? And the answer to that is, the lessons hardly ever get implemented. It gets filed away because it's a bureaucratic checkbox exercise for many organizations. We've got a 1-page tool that asks 5 questions that we can then be really clear on what we got to take action on. We call it the experience transformer. How do you take learnings and negative experiences and use them as fuel for positive change? And that tool, I think, is one of your favorites, isn't it?
Yeah, you betcha.
So,
yeah. So, another question, how did adopting it flow into the company culture? Did it affect it in any way? Negatively or positive?
I think both, right? So, and this is an ongoing thing, and I think it takes leadership and communication. So, I think there's 2 elements that I think were really culturally shook things up, right? And one is process. Let's write down what we do so we can identify best practices, so we so that when you go on vacation or when you got to take over someone else's role for a week, it's really clear how things get done and what gets done. And so getting that was a struggle that people really didn't understand that, why isn't that office in Eastern Canada invoicing? Well, because we've never given them, this is how we do it in the West. Where's it written down so that they know how to repeat that? And so those were the kinds of things that weren't happening, but that's completely changed in the last 12 months. I mean, I think we're at, core process 175 or something as of today, right? So we have step by step gone through every team and looked at what are the key things that we do and getting those wrote down. So that was a struggle that really, and our goal this year is not just to have them written down, but that everyone is following them. And I mean, right after this meeting, I got a training session with new salespeople to train them on certain processes because they came into the company with no processes or different processes, likely none. Salespeople tend to be lone wolf kind of cowboyish in our industry, and because most companies don't systemize what they do. So I think processes was culturally a big shift that took some time and had resistance. The other one is the countdownability chart, meaning here's my job and here's what I'm responsible for doing, and dialing that in to closer and closer areas of effectiveness. And so we made a commitment this year that we're going to get the right people in the right seats. And so there's two parts to that, right? One is right people is, are they a core values culture fit for our business? And we've got a EOS tool for communicating and measuring, are you fitting into our core values? But the second part of that is right seat. And it's dialing that in, that if someone's a right fit for the company, we also got to get them doing the right things. And not every job is great for everyone. I don't know about you, but I know enough about accounting that I could do it, but I would hate it. And I would probably suck at it. And could I learn? Sure. But my life would be miserable, right? There are people who would cringe at the idea of getting on camera like we are and having conversations to share information about our businesses. But you and I are okay with that, right? And so, there's certain people that would never want to be on our podcast. And so, but inside of that, there's a difference between status and capability. And, one of the big shakeups in the business that caused some ruffles this year was taking people who had technical skills, but maybe didn't have the right leadership or action skills to do one job, and putting them in a role that they could be more successful at. And so in making those moves, some people said, well, he's been here for 5 or 10 years and you just shifted him into a different seat. That's not fair. But it's not about, the long term, it will work out better for that person and for the company. But there is a perception that comes from the bureaucratic world that longevity gives seniority and tenure. That he's in that seat, he should stay in that seat. If it's not the right seat for them, we got to make a change. And so I think in making shifts in seats that are based on do they get it, do they want it, do they have the capability to do it, the work that job requires. We've ruffled a few feathers, but and so these are easy things these are simple things to do, but they're hard to do, right? It's really clear when someone isn't successful in a part of their job and making that change. But getting people to understand that we're doing it for the good of the person and the company and for the right reasons in the context of right person, right seat. I think that one has taken some grinding and perseverance on the leadership team's part to do that.
So that kind of leads me into one more point as well that I wanted to cover, which is, so like, let's say you're saying you're at 80% now. We continue to grow. Our business is growing. That 80% now is going to get diluted with new people that don't understand the business. So how does EOS like the growth of our business, how do we get ahead of keeping on top of implementing as new people are coming on board?
Yeah, I mean, they got to be onboarded into it, right? And fortunately, we have a cadence of how people who come into the company get introduced to these systems. I think most people, when they come in and they experience the culture and the attitude in the business, it's refreshing. I mean, we had a new leak repair person start last week, and we've got an onboarding email system that goes out to new people that introduces them to our culture and our operating systems, and I've gotten 3 emails this week from new employees who have started in operations who have said how cool this place is. They can feel that this is different and they like it. And so I think that's part of it. The other part is we've got, the faster you can get new team members into the meeting cadence of joining a team and being in the weekly meeting so they experience it is, I think, key. We just finished our quarterly state of the company meeting with all employees, and this is refreshing and different. I mean, most companies don't get together as an entire group and talk about the whole business, what they did in the last 90 days, what they're doing in the next 90 days with everyone, and share it with transparency. I think that helps people get it. And the thing that I think is really key, it's really simple. We have 5 core values and 19 cultural standards, right? That defines our intentional culture in our business. And the biggest thing that can build that momentum for how do we scale with new people is that people who are veterans in the company, they have to do one simple thing. When they see someone in the business doing something that's sort of outside how we do things, they got to say one simple thing. John, that's not how we do things here. This is how we do things. And so the more of our culture champions that we have who are able to simply help new people along by saying, that's not how we do things here, this is how we do it, and get them and helping them see that, like, our systems and our tools are designed to make their lives easier, but there is a learning curve. And the faster that our veterans help guide the new people into using our system of how we operate the business, I think the faster that creates. And so, it takes one person at a time. And the more leaders, managers, supervisors, and frontline team members who say, I saw a great email from a member of our team yesterday. We have a cultural standard about dress for success. We got to look and act the part. We dress the right way. Our vehicles look the right way. Their cleanliness, they're professional. And someone called out a field truck that was not meeting our standards. Not only did that person call it out, but someone else spoke up and said, yeah, and by the way, guys, in that truck, I saw certain things that should have stayed on site. We got to get those radios back to that client. And so just those things where people have a voice and say, that's not how we do things, I think is a really important part of the standard. And, I think for most companies, if they've ever heard of their company core values, it was probably at their head office and it was some placard. I think even fewer companies have a defined culture of here's how we do things overall in this business. And I think that's, getting people into that rhythm, that cadence of how we do things, I think is the scalability. And, the more champions of our operating system and our culture we have, the faster and the momentum builds on that, I think. And so it started with me, but
so that
90% of it is not me anymore.
That partially answers my wrapping up question, which I wanted to, still throw out there, and you might be able to shorten it up and make it a little sweeter for our listeners to hear. But what advice would you give another entrepreneur that is considering the EOS as their business model?
I would say get 2 or 3 people on your team to be champions with it along with you as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. I think that's the number one thing. And for an entrepreneur, when you got 1 or 2 people who are really showing you a spark that they get this, it's energizing fuel for an entrepreneur. it gets frustrating for an entrepreneur when you're hitting a brick wall of resistance. And so find those two or three
So to
people.
speak on that real quick, how long do you give for resistance? Like if you've got an employee that's just they're not getting it, and you know that's very common. Some might not right off the hop. How long is too long?
Oh, I mean, we took a long time. We took a long time, and and our business in some ways is a bit unique because we're in a very specialized space and we do need certain technical skills. And so, I've given people a lot longer to get on board with the ideas than, if people's technical skills weren't as rare. Um, but I really think that the journey starts with finding a couple. I think you gotta get a couple of people in your leadership team who are just going to champion it as strong as you in your first 3 to 6 months. It took us a
Yep.
couple years before we cycled through finding out that there were people on our leadership team who just didn't get it. They lived in status and bureaucracy, and did not understand that if you want your people to operate this way, you have to as well. And we have a standard that says you don't just know our values, to live them. And so I think that's key. I think you really gotta it's a year from start to finish that I think you should be in the rhythm. And I think you got 3 to 6 months to find those two or three people who are going to be the spark plugs in the engine, right? To really drive it. And the more of those, you can drive a car with 6 out of 8 engines firing on cylinders, but you really get a lot more horsepower when you get all 8 cylinders, pumping, right? And
Everyone on the same page.
yeah, but I think you need to find champions, and and they come in all different places. Some people are culture champions, some people are measurement champions, some people are process champions. You're not going to find everyone all at once who understands and really loves all 8 elements or all 6 elements, but the more that you get people who are really buying into pieces of it, and then you can start to figure out who are my process people and who are my measurement people and who are my traction people, and then they start to share. I think that's where it comes. But what I've seen in the last 2 years, has been, people like yourself who have really ignited this thing, has really made the most difference, right? And so for the entrepreneur who's listening, you got to find people on your team who are going to be as excited and energized about this as you are, and then you start shifting gears. So it's about your people.
Right on. Well, that's all I had. I think we've covered all the points that I wanted to talk on. So I appreciate your time, and we'll see you on the next one.
Well, thanks for being the interviewer. And normally I got to think up the questions. This time I got to speak too much. So anyway, I hope that was useful. I hope that was useful for our external audience. I hope that's really useful for our internal audience, because we decided to do this episode for both front stage and backstage, and hope it's valuable. But it's certainly an interesting journey. And being inside of an entrepreneurial company isn't for everyone, right? It is a different way of doing things, and it takes a different level of energy and accountability, and so it's nothing wrong with being inside of a company that doesn't operate this way. As a matter of fact, I'll close with this, and this is really for our listeners. There isn't anything conflicting between corporate bureaucratic companies and entrepreneurial companies. In fact, I think they need to work together. Most of our clients are big energy businesses and big contractors who work in energy businesses, who are corporate, who have bureaucratic, rigid ways of doing things. And that's perfectly okay. And entrepreneurial companies play a really important part in that, because what happens when you take a large corporate business that's bureaucratic and pairs them with a large corporate supplier who's also bureaucratic? Guess what happens? Nothing. Right? I mean, it takes a long time. There's, projects take too long, responses take too long, projects become more expensive and long lead times. Entrepreneurial companies have a really important role to play inside of corporate businesses, because corporate teams on corporate, on corporate teams can leverage entrepreneurial suppliers and partners to move faster, to be creative, to get things done that they can't get done in their own system, right? And so I think operating entrepreneurially makes more sense when you're a supplier or service provider to these large corporate entities, because your job is to be different, to move faster, to be creative, and that takes an operating system that's different. We know some innovative industrial businesses who try to mimic being a corporation in terms of the way they do things. And it slows their growth. It slows their success, because by definition, if you're a small or medium-sized business, you need to move fast. You need to be creative. You need to be different, because if you're going to be a commodity and be the same as everyone else, they don't need you, right? So I'll close with that there's a really important place inside of every marketplace, but I think really importantly inside of the industrial and the energy space, for people who operate entrepreneurially, because our clients need us to be that way. Imagine if you had to respond in 2 weeks to a leak as opposed to in 10 minutes. Right? And that,
I get you.
Right? And so that's why entrepreneurial companies, I think, are really valuable. So, Mike, thanks for interviewing me.
Right on. I'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Thanks, folks. Bye for now.